Welcome, everyone. My name is Ron Flax. I'm the Deputy Director for Community Planning and Permitting, in charge of building and permitting, as well as the Chief Building Official for the county. Thanks for joining us this evening. The goal this evening is to spend some time specifically talking about the Boulder County energy codes. These codes are called BuildSmart. It's just a name for the collection of energy codes that regulate energy efficiency for unincorporated areas of Boulder County. I think we have quite a bit of content to cover tonight, and we're going to do our best to address many of the questions that we've gotten so far about this topic. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a series of additional resources for folks for additional questions that maybe we didn't get into this evening. But to the best of our ability, I'd like this to be, as much in this format allows, a bit of a conversation. So, if you do have questions, there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So if you have something you'd like us to address, we encourage you to open up that Q&A window and let us know what we can help you with. The chat feature, we're not using the chat feature this evening, so just the Q&A is the best way to reach out with specific questions. But as you might imagine, we've actually been getting quite a few questions, and we're hoping to cover a lot of the topics that are on everyone's mind as we move through the presentation this evening. Just to give you just a little bit of a brief background about myself. So I am the Chief Building Official for the county. My background is, in fact, with construction and home building. So I did work for years as a part of a production home building company. I have a degree in architecture and worked in that field for quite a few years. I also am a HERS rater and spent some time doing energy rating work. So I have a pretty broad perspective on specifically on energy efficiency issues and how we build high performance homes. But specifically tonight, what we're really going to try to focus in on is help you get a basic understanding of what the energy codes look like for rebuilding single family homes in Boulder County, and how you can go about doing that, and what are some of the best strategies for thinking about these topics. So with that, I'd like to invite Zach to start us off.
Thanks, Ron, and good evening, everyone. I'm Zach Swank. I'm the Built Environment Coordinator for Boulder County's Office of Sustainability, Climate Action, and Resilience. And before, this is a very technical topic, building codes are, I should say. And before we get into, all sort of the nitty gritty and details, I thought I would like to spend a couple of moments just sort of demystifying and sort of broadly speaking, like, what are we talking about tonight? What do energy efficiency codes address? So I'm going to take two angles on that. The first is, what makes up a high performance home? And predominantly, we're talking about high performance windows, high insulation, high R value insulation, heat recovery ventilation, having an airtight envelope around your building with no thermal bridges. And thermal bridges are where you have a medium that allows heat to transfer, like think a 2x4 in between your fiberglass insulation batting. And then, taking advantage of the solar orientation and shading. So broadly speaking, that's, some of the elements that make up high performance homes in terms of energy efficiency codes. Broadly speaking, what makes up an electrified home, it could be any combination of these things. Not all of them necessarily all at the same time. And I'm absolutely not saying that all of these things are required. I'm just saying that this is the universe of things that we're talking about here tonight. So that's rooftop solar, or maybe you're purchasing renewables from the grid. Maybe you have home battery storage, a heat pump clothes dryer, a heat pump hot water heater, heat pump for space heating and cooling, electric cooking, whether that's electric resistance or induction, electric vehicle car charging, and energy recovery ventilation, or typically when we're talking about an electrified homes, we're talking about some of those elements. So what are the benefits of an electrified and high performance home? Well, first and foremost, it's healthier. You have healthier indoor air quality because your home is sealed against air infiltration. You have filtered fresh air, so the air you are bringing in, you can control it, and you can bring in more fresh air, and it's filtered. And you have no natural gas combustion byproducts to breathe, whether that's from leakage from a furnace or from a natural gas stove. The homes are more comfortable. They maintain their temperature better. They're quieter. You have less noise coming in from outside. They also have increased resistance to future wildfires and smoke damage. That's that air tightness. You're not sucking in embers into your house. You're not also sucking in smoke into the house through natural infiltration because you have a really airtight envelope. You have increased resiliency during disasters. So, say you had a natural gas furnace. That's great if you have natural gas service, but if the electricity is not on, there's no power to run the electronics and the fans in that furnace. So, your natural gas furnace doesn't do you any good without electricity. And as we saw in the Marshall Fire, electricity was restored first before natural gas was restored. Also, with a highly insulated home, your home will maintain temperature longer. Your energy costs are lower, and you have a reduced contribution to the climate crisis. So those are some of the benefits, and those are some of the, when we're talking about energy codes and when we're talking about electrified and high efficiency homes, those are the things we're talking about.
Okay, so what are the BuildSmart requirements? Before I get too far into this, Rick, I was hoping maybe you could roll out those poll questions that we have set up. So if everyone could just take a moment, this is going to help me just sort of understand a little bit about who the audience is. Just trying to get a feel for who I'm talking to. This Zoom format is not quite as personal as if we were all in a room together. So this will be helpful. Just give the interpreters a chance here. Okay. Rick, how are we doing?
It looks like most folks have responded, so I'll share their poll results now.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I really appreciate that. Thanks for taking the time. That's helpful to understand. Okay.
And Ron, sorry, this is Rick. Did you just want to read the results quickly, just so we have that kind of captured in the video?
I just closed the window.
I can read them. So we have 42% saying that they lost their home or are damaged from the fire. 11% are builders who are familiar with BuildSmart. 11% are builders who are new to BuildSmart. 24% are design professionals, architects, HERS, energy raters, or similar. And then 11% said other.
Okay, Thank you. And you know, the results of that poll are not not going to be used for much of anything other than just help me understand who I'm speaking with at the moment. So so thank you. That's not if you didn't get a chance to respond, that's not gonna have any impact. So I just trying to understand who's in the room with us. So thank you. Next slide, please, if you would. Zach, are you able to? Excellent. Okay, so just by way of background, what we're working with in unincorporated Boulder County is a set of building code requirements that are based on the 2015 codes. So this is those the code books you see on the table there are the nationally published code books by the International Code Council, and then in the center of that table is a copy of the physical copy of the Boulder County amendments to that code. So we've been using this code since January of 2016, so it's been in place for quite a while. We had plans to update it a few years back, but COVID really set us back a little bit. So we're still using the codes that were published back then, but they still are effective for the purpose at hand. But but just so you understand where they come from, we're still using the 2015 as the fundamental basis for our codes. Next slide, please. So this, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just making sure people understand what's called the HERS index. It's the Home Energy Rating Scale or rating system. And this is a tool that is used to help us measure the overall energy efficiency of a single family home. The scale is based upon the 2006 energy codes, and it's defined that a home built to the 2006 energy code is defined as a HERS 100, and a home that uses the same amount of energy as it produces on site in a given calendar year, or an average calendar year, is defined as a HERS 0. And this scale can be used to measure any existing single family home. If you have existing housing stock, often what we find is we have HERS scores that are well above 100. So, 150, 170 is pretty common for many of the existing homes that we have in our community. But this is a really primary tool that we use in Boulder County's energy code to help us understand and regulate the energy efficiency of our homes. The rating scale and the rating system accounts for essentially all of the energy that's used to heat and cool a home. There are assumptions for average homeowners for plug loads. It's designed specifically to avoid being swayed by individual behavior. So if some people like their homes warm or some people like their homes cool, that is designed out of this index. So it's designed to be blind as to the occupant behavior, and it's based upon very, very large averages for behavior. And it's been certified by the national laboratories very carefully over many years at this point. So it's a very, very useful tool for us to figure out how to understand how efficient a home is. So the way that it works is essentially it's essentially an energy model, and that model takes into account all these different features and just spits out a single number. What is the HERS score? And we use that quite a bit in our code. If you go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to jump in a little bit to these are the requirements that come out of our code for regulating new single-family homes. So this is essentially, if you are building a new home because you lost your home in your fire, this is the first sort of thing to understand. And when we look at these numbers, so the square footage that's shown on this slide, it's very important to understand that what we're talking about in this slide for square footage is the conditioned floor area. So it's not the same as what you might have been hearing about in terms of residential floor area that regulates the overall size of the home on the planning side of Boulder County. So what falls under the land use code or the Article 19 provisions within the land use code. This slide is just focused on energy. And so what we care about is the area of the home that is being heated or cooled. So essentially you can think of it as the area of the home that's the interior space. So when we measure essentially to the inside face of the interior air barrier, which typically is our drywall or gypsum wall boarding. So this is just the inside face of the interior walls. So it is always a smaller number than the residential floor area that we're talking about. So just an important distinction there. But basically, as the home gets bigger, the stringency of the requirements goes up. So the smaller the house, the easier it is to meet these requirements. And what you can see here is that there is in the first category, so I'll just go down the list here. So in the first category, for homes that are up to 3,500 square feet, you have a choice. You can either use what we call the prescriptive path, and we have a slide that talks a little bit more about this coming up a little later. But the prescriptive path is a method in the code that tells you what the minimum energy efficiency is for some of the key components of the home. So it tells you what your minimum wall insulation should be, what your minimum ceiling insulation be, the kinds of windows that you have to have, and so forth. It goes through and essentially provides a prescription. This is a piece of the code that's available. It is in many ways the least flexible, because what ends up happening is you have to put on your drawings for your building permit application the details of what you're building and show how it meets each of the elements in that prescription. The next box down is what we call the ERI path. That's the code language, but essentially the ERI path counts. We treat that the same as the HERS path. So you'll see these things interchanged. ERI and HERS are in Boulder County treated as interchangeable metrics. But so you'll see in the code, in the public code, it refers to it as ERI, but for our purposes, you can think of that as HERS. I'm hearing some translation going on there. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. It's a little confusing, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds as to why we have these two things. But in fact, it's really the HERS score is how we regulate in Boulder County. And I have a table coming up. I think it's the next slide is the table. So Zach, if you could just go forward for a moment. So and I'll come back to the slide we were just at, but this is a graphical index showing as the house gets bigger, how the HERS target gets more stringent. So as your conditioned floor area approaches 5,000 square feet, then you're talking about a home that has to have a HERS score of 0. Whereas you're building a 2,500 square foot house, you only need a HERS target of 50. It's important to keep in mind that as the house gets bigger, it both gets harder to actually achieve these numbers, but the target itself moves a bit. So if you are building a 3,500 square foot house, you can see on this chart, you need a HERS of 40. That spot is kind of an important demarcation, because if you are just building a house and using energy efficiency measures, so good windows, good insulation, your air sealing well, you're putting in good mechanical systems, it's hard to get the HERS score to go much below a HERS 40. You can get a little bit below than that, but not much. Beyond that point of HERS 40, you have to start talking about adding renewable energy systems to the project. So that's talking about things like roof-mounted PV or ground-mounted PV, or perhaps participation in a community solar garden. But below that number, a HERS 40 or above, all of that is readily achievable by just building with good wall systems, good air sealing, and so forth. So it's just, as you start to plan your homes, it's important to sort of think about that a little bit. All right, Zach, we can go back one slide. Okay, now, so as we get into bigger houses, let's say you have a house that's over 3,500 square feet, but smaller than 5,000, there's an additional requirement. And you can see that middle box there, Energy Star certification. And that this is, so you would have to hit both the HERS target or the ERI target, as well as one of those other boxes. And I would say that on this list, the Energy Star certification is in fact the far and away the easiest and most popular way to meet these requirements. We don't have very many houses in Boulder County that have been using that third box of Passive House, LEED Platinum, or Living Building Challenge as a way to demonstrate code compliance. Most people choose the Energy Star and the HERS score as the way to do it. And part of that is just because the documentation is very easy, it's straightforward. The Energy Star program was designed to be readily achievable by production home builders across the country. It is a realistic set of requirements with very easily verifiable requirements. And so it's just easy to achieve the Energy Star requirement and to use to demonstrate your compliance with the building code, even for those projects that maybe are pursuing one of the other additional certifications. Even if they're doing that, often they still demonstrate code compliance with the HERS score and the Energy Star, even if they in fact are pursuing something more vigorous. Now, it's important to make a note of on this slide that the building code, BuildSmart, requires Energy Star version 3 minimum. Energy Star version 1 is about to transition into the baseline version. So the Energy Star program, which is regulated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, they have a process for rolling out new versions of Energy Star. And so essentially Boulder County has been accepting whatever the current version of Energy Star is. I bring this up in particular because of the energy rebates that are being provided by Excel. Excel is offering a fairly generous incentive for homeowners that achieve Energy Star version 3.2 certification. I believe we have a slide a little later going into some additional detail about that. But the reality is that homes that are built to these standards, the difference between Energy Star version 3 and 3.2 is actually not that large. And so it's not going to be a huge or heavy lift to get those additional dollars from Excel. And I think it's a very, very good value for that. But it's something you will have to just pay attention to a little bit when you're working with your design team to make sure that as you're designing the project, that you're targeting Energy Star version 3.2 and not just the minimum Energy Star that's available in the marketplace. And then I'll go into the third category here is for the largest homes over 5,000 square feet. And for those homes, there's a couple of additional requirements. The first is that you can see that HERS score has 2 numbers in it. So not only will you have to achieve the HERS 0 as is on that chart, but there's also a requirement that you have to achieve what we call a natural HERS, or a HERS without the influence of the PV of a minimum of 50. Now, this is actually not something that is hard to do. If you're targeting a HERS 0, it's actually very, very cost effective to get that initial HERS score down as low as possible before you're adding any photovoltaics to the process. But we do have this check in there just to make sure that you're not just adding a huge amount of PV to a poorly designed or poorly built building envelope, that we get a certain minimum level of efficiency, which translates to a certain minimum level of comfort and durability and resilience before adding the PV. And then there's another requirement, the second box down, which is the Department of Energy, the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home Certification. So this is a program that takes the basics of the Energy Star program and adds some additional requirements. Again, a program that is readily achievable, designed nationally to be attractive for production home builders around the country to make homes that are more energy efficient. This also has a lot of great value to the homeowner. It gets into a bit about some of the other durability and comfort features of the home. It has some pieces of it that really help us with interior air quality and water efficiency. So again, a very well designed and readily achievable program. One piece to note is that the Excel rebates for the Zero Energy Ready Home program are tied to their version 2 program. So that is a newer program, and again, something that you want to just make sure you're paying attention to, because it has again some pretty generous funding from Excel if you achieve that, but you do need to make sure that you're specifying with your design team that you're looking to hit the version 2 certification and not just the version 1 certification that is on the market right now. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, and I'll just go back to this again, that this is, as the house increases, the HERS score gets more stringent. So when I'm asked the question, especially for bigger homes, what's the cost of BuildSmart and what's the best way to reduce the cost? Actually making the home smaller, even by small amounts, can sometimes have a pretty dramatic impact on reducing the stringency of the energy code. And again, when you're looking at these numbers, we're talking about conditioned floor area, not total residential floor area. So if you have an unheated garage, that doesn't count towards this. If you have porch areas, that doesn't count towards this. We're just looking at the portion of the home that is being heated or cooled. I will bring attention to this, the little note on the bottom of this. It's a pretty important piece of this, and that is that if you have elements of the home that are fossil fuel consuming devices that are outside the building envelope, so outside the home, and so we think about things like a pool or a hot tub or a snow melt system, or maybe like a patio heater, anything like that, where we have something that's a heating device that is consuming fuel, decorative fireplaces, natural gas decorative fireplaces, all of those things require direct energy offsets. So those things are not accounted for in the HERS score, and so we account for them separately. There's no, if you have a barbecue, that doesn't count, but if you have a decorative fireplace, that does. So the idea is that those additional energy consuming devices have to offset those energy components directly. Okay, if you can go to the next slide here. So a couple other keynotes talking about this topic. So if you have a lot of glass in the home, so this is for smaller homes that are eligible for the prescriptive pathway. If you have a lot of glass in the house, unless that glass is all on the south elevation, what ends up happening is that the prescriptive pathway sort of falls apart in terms of how well it actually works. And so we ask that if once you put too much glass on the house, that we switch over and use the HERS rating system to help us. And again, this is probably the number number one reason why many folks really like the HERS rating as opposed to the prescriptive path is because there's no limitations. You can do whatever you like and see the impact of your home design in the HERS score. And so the HERS score again gives us maximum flexibility. So it's a really useful tool that way. Just as a side note, any place we have electric, a new car or garage port, we do have electric vehicle charging requirements. Okay, if you can go to the next slide. All right, now this I don't expect you to read this whole thing. I was just putting it here for a little bit of clarity. This is an excerpt straight out of our code that talks about the prescriptive pathway. And again, if you look moving across that chart, you can see that there are different named components of the home and specific requirements of what that energy efficiency shall be. And these numbers are very, very close, if not identical, in many respects to what's actually in the current version of the 2021 code that was published. So even though we adopted this back in 2015, at that point it was considered more aggressive than the 15 code, but the nationally published code has caught up, and so these numbers match pretty closely. We do allow this to be used, but we do point out that there actually ends up being more restriction in terms of the flexibility, especially during the construction process. Because let's say you're having trouble. I'll choose skylights for an example. So this has a Skylight U Factor requirement. So U Factor is a method of measuring the energy loss through that assembly. And let's say because of supply chain problems, you're having trouble finding a skylight that meets that requirement. If you're using a HERS rating, you can simply put in whatever you have available and then make adjustments elsewhere in the design. If you're using the prescriptive path, you're kind of locked in to these requirements. So a lot less flexibility, both in terms of the initial design, but also throughout the process. Whereas the HERS rating, the only thing that matters at the end of the day is that you have designed a home and built a home that meets that overall efficiency score. So a lot more flexibility from the design team. Next slide, please.
So we know one question that comes up a lot, of course, particularly given the underinsurance challenges that folks are facing, is how can you find ways to save money or reduce costs when building your home? We don't have all the answers here tonight, but we want to cover a couple specifically as they relate to the energy use and design of your home. So first one is aligning your team. So having an architect, builder, and subcontractors that are all aware and on board with the goals that you want to achieve with your rebuild, particularly around, what is required or what certification you're trying to build to. That's really important. If they're not all aligned and don't all understand, then you can have miscommunication and things get accidentally cut out of the build that should have stayed, etc. So having alignment is really important. Considering your home performance early, what level of certification are you going for? Is it the code minimum, or are you going for something better? Having that in mind early on in your design stage can really impact the cost effectiveness of the home that you're building. Building a more simple shape of a home with less, a more sort of boxy home with less sort of architectural features and a wall bumped out 2 feet here or there, not only will save you energy use by having less surface area to your interior space area, but it also reduces the construction complexity costs. Having multifunctional spaces also can help reduce construction costs and excels the incentives from an Excel Energy can also have an impact. So this is a visual representation of the cost influence curve, and what it's demonstrating here is, or representing in the blue, in your early conceptual phase, when you're just starting to think about what type of home you want, working with a designer, working with an architect, you have a very large ability to influence the cost of how much your home will be. As you move through those stages and move into, you have your architectural plans, you have your permitting done, things get more locked into place, and you have less flexibility to change things. It becomes more costly to change things. So this is just really emphasizing the point that considering what type of home you want to build early on can have a big impact on the final costs of that home, as if you're making decisions with that in mind early on. For Excel Energy's incentives, I hope at this point you're all familiar. There's $10,000 for building to Energy Star version 3.2. As Ron said, there's $12,500 for Zero Energy Ready Home version 2, $17,500 for Energy Star's new certification program, and $37,500 for Passive House. Now, it's important to remember that these incentives are only for homeowners who are rebuilding. There will be a different set of incentives for new homeowners who are buying a lot where a house was destroyed by the Marshall Fire. That will be a different set of incentives. This is just for homeowners who lost their home and are rebuilding on their own lot. And as you go down this list, the more high performance home you have. So let's talk about how Excel's incentives relate to the BuildSmart program. So first, looking at specifically the easiest comparison and the easiest corollary is for homes that are over 3,500 square feet. Under BuildSmart, as Ron mentioned, they are required to meet the prescriptive path, usually going, not prescriptive, pick one of those two, and usually one of them is meeting the Energy Star requirements as the performance requirement. The BuildSmart requirement is Energy Star version 3. Excel's requirement is Energy Star version 3.2. We will give a comparison on what the difference is there in a subsequent slide here. If for folks who are going to using a Passive House standard as their means of meeting BuildSmart compliance, that would earn you the $37,500 standard. And for folks choosing to build to the Zero Energy Ready Home, which is one of the three options for homes over 5,000 square feet, that would get you the $12,500. And again, that's version 2 would be required, not version 1. But again, we'll talk about that shortly. And for homes under 3,500 square feet, there is there's not an exact corollary as clear in how the BuildSmart program is set up, but obviously those homes are also still eligible for all of those same incentives. So I want to talk about the difference between Energy Star version 3.2 and Zero Energy Ready Homes version 2 and version 1. The main difference between those versions is that the newer versions are built on the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. And here on this slide, not trying to have you digest everything, but if you look vertically down between each of the columns in the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code and below the corresponding column in BuildSmart, you will see that frequently the BuildSmart requirements are the same or more stringent than the 2021 requirements. And I want to be clear that Boulder County is not on the 2021 code. This is merely a demonstration that the amended code that Boulder County is on is quite similar to what the requirements of Energy Star version 3.2 and Zero Energy Ready Homes are based on, which is that 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. So the sum of all this is that by building to Boulder County's BuildSmart codes, you should be very close to meeting the incentive levels that were set by Excel.
Okay, so if you can go to the next slide. So, so we've been talking about these programs, and I guess it's going to be a little bit useful to describe a little bit more how these things relate to each other. So, so the first thing is, the Energy Star program, and as Zach just pointed out, the Energy Star version 3.2 is based upon a newer baseline code, and so the idea of the Energy Star program is it's designed to push just a little bit above the baseline code, and so what ends up happening is the Energy Star program is always supposed to be leading or out ahead of the codes, the nationally published codes by the International Code Council. So what ends up happening is it just gradually gets more and more efficient in a leading way. But the other piece of this that I think is really provides a great deal of value to the consumer is that there's some additional checks and verifications built into these programs. So for instance, if you are building a home to Energy Star, not only do they give you some guidance on the let's say the efficiency and power consumption of the bath fans, but they actually also verify when the rater tests that those bath fans in fact are doing what they're supposed to do, that they actually are installed and functioning properly in a way that that isn't necessarily built into any of the other requirements. So the baseline code verifies those things that are there, but we don't have a mechanism to actually test those things. As we move into the Energy Star program, and then even more so with the Zero Energy Ready Home program, there are additional checks and verifications and credentialing of the people who are installing this equipment. So, and what we find is when we do that additional verification, we do find times when things were thought to have been installed correctly, but just weren't. And so the additional verification actually provides a great deal of long-term value for the owners of these buildings, and it was designed with that in mind. It was designed to come up with a way on a national level. Again, these are both national programs to verify that we're actually building homes, and that the money that's being spent by the owner to install some of this equipment is actually getting them what they paid for. That we're doing these additional checks and verification, and those checks, there's quite a bit in terms of the heating and cooling systems that are verified, but also in terms of some of the key water management details that are so important to the long-term durability of the home. As we move into the Zero Energy Ready Home program, that list starts to expand even further, and we start to get into air quality issues, and making sure that, like, for instance, there's minimum requirements for if you have a whole house forced air system, there's a requirements that talks about what minimum filter efficiency you have in the house. And that's really actually quite important when we look at some of the changes that we're seeing to our environment. So for instance, we saw last summer some very smoky periods last summer from some of the big fires that were happening to the west of us, and a home with a better heating and cooling system, a better ventilation system, has the ability to install better whole house filtration to reduce some of those smoke particles in a way that you can't just retrofit on an existing system that hasn't been designed for it. So these programs are really some of the low-hanging fruit in terms of value for the homeowners, in terms of really getting the long-term value for the homeowners. Next slide, please. And this is just one of many of the sort of marketing campaigns published by the Department of Energy advertising their Zero Energy Ready Home program. But you can see here, it's a little hard to make out, but there's these green bars and the blue bars. And that is trying to help understand some of the distinction between Zero Energy Ready Home program and the Energy Star. This slide is a little bit dated. I think the baseline code has come up quite a bit compared to Energy Star, and the Energy Star to Zero Energy Ready Home program gap is a little smaller than it was, especially for some of the basics about durability. Some of those durability pieces have made its way down to other parts of the code since this slide was put together. But it really is designed by the same fundamental group of people and scientists at our national laboratories and in the private sector who've been pushing and understanding these codes for quite a while now. And they really are designed to integrate together and for one to pick up right exactly where the other leaves off. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why these programs have really gotten much easier to understand, is that they're now integrated into one piece of software. So the same software that an energy rater would use to generate a HERS score can also tell you where you are regarding compliance with Energy Star or the Zero Energy Ready Home program. Now, just one caveat is that that software doesn't yet give us answers for the higher level of performance that's being asked for the utility rebates, for Excel rebates, but that's going to be an additional layer that the energy rater would have to pay attention to. And it's my understanding that that later this month, there is some specific training that's being put together by Excel that's specifically targeting contractors and energy raters to help them identify and understand as you move from the Energy Star version 3.0 or 3.1 to the 3.2, what that actually means. So even though the software might not be able to spit us out an answer quite as speedily, the energy raters will be able to help us identify what those things are. And again, it's not really expected to be a super heavy lift, especially if you're building a bigger home, for instance, that has to meet those lower HERS targets. You should get quite a bit of the way there, and that additional incentive money should more than cover any incremental addition that you have to manage. I do want to, I guess I'll just say this again, and I know Zach spoke about this, but it bears repeating because it's such an important concept. And that when we talk about what does it cost to do these things, it's actually a pretty complicated question. When you talk about whether or not, compared to what is really always the question. So what does it cost to build a home that meets these requirements versus some other requirements? The question is, what are you really starting from? Because if you are designing a new home with these requirements in mind, then the extra incremental cost can actually be quite small, and in some cases, very small when you start to factor in any kind of payback for the lower utility costs that are involved with operating these homes. But if you start with a home that was designed without any of this in mind, it actually might be a pretty significant upcharge to get it there. So that that cost benefit control curve that Zach put up earlier is really just a super important concept. So if you start approaching your design team with the idea that you're going to be pursuing Energy Star or Zero Energy Home certification, that understanding right off the bat is going to guide decisions that really maximize the benefit without as much of an additional cost. All right, next slide, please. So again, this is just talking about maybe some of the pieces that are most important as we talk about things like the Zero Energy Ready Home program. So that program does give you require certification in what they call their Indoor Air Plus program, and it's got some really basic things that I think everybody wants in their home. So it talks about how to make sure we're building our house in a way that prevents pests from getting into our house. How do we make sure we're properly controlling moisture that's coming into our house? How do we make sure that if we have any combustion devices, and I say if because more and more people are building without combustion devices in their homes, but if we do, how do we make sure we build that so it's safe for the occupants? How do we make sure we're properly dealing with ventilation and filtration? So these are all things that that people want in their homes. I haven't met anybody who says these are not things that are important to them if they're building a home that they plan on living in. It's a little bit different if you're building a speculative home that you're planning building and selling, and you're not expecting to reap the benefits. But if you're planning on building a home for you to live in, these are features that every homeowner, in fact, wants. We've seen survey after survey and conversation after conversation that they really aren't any of these features that homeowners feel like they're not interested in having in their homes. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are a couple of slides, and just and I don't expect anyone to be able to read all the details on these drawings. These are just some slides that I wanted to just help people understand when we talk about passive house design. So there has been a huge uptick lately locally with people thinking about and being interested in what we call the passive house design. So the passive house is a certification program. And if you achieve certification with passive house design, there is a very generous incentive being provided by Excel, but it does require you to think a little bit differently about how that home is built. This is a very useful design detail. These are free images that I pulled from High Performance Building Supply 475, High Performance Building Supply. And these are just to give people some idea of what we're talking about. So these are, what you'll notice about this is very thick walls. So these are double stud walls insulated with a lot of cellulose. And this is a very good, durable, long-lasting, energy-efficient, low-carbon solution. It's non-toxic. It doesn't have a lot of spray foam insulation or plastic foam insulations that might present environmental hazards or that can readily become fuel in a fire. This is a cellulose-based system. It's really works very, very well. It is a thicker wall than most people are used to building, and what we've been hearing is people are designing and building these kinds of walls without much of a price increase compared to traditional building, as long as people are designing upfront and keeping the architecture relatively simple. The fewer convoluted corners or complicated connections that you have, the easier it is to pull this kind of detail off. But it's a very effective process. If you go to the next slide, please. So the key thing about the passive house, the actual requirements are relatively simple. The achieving it it takes considerable care up front in terms of thinking about it, but also in terms of the construction itself. But basically what the overall passive house certification program is talking about, trying to get the space heating demands very, very low. So that's where that 475 comes from. It's 4.75 thousand BTUs per square foot per year. That number probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but that's a very, very tight envelope. It's an envelope that's tight enough that if in the wintertime there's a big storm and knocks power out and the house doesn't have any heating ability, these houses will coast on their own for a long time. They're very thermally protected, and they do great just left to their own. They remain habitable, comfortable places for much, much longer than what we traditionally see in homes that are built in Boulder County. I've heard many stories about people who have built houses to these standards, and they become the gathering place for the neighborhood when the power goes out. They also are incredibly quiet. It's actually one of the more remarkable features, and one of the reasons I think fundamentally so many people who have lived in a house like this vow never go back, is because the houses just are very quiet. You don't hear the street noises in the same way. You don't hear windstorms in the same way. You don't hear rainstorms in the same way. They're just very quiet homes, and people really seem to like that. They're also very well sealed. So there's that 0.6 air changes per hour, ACH, air changes per hour at 50 pascals, 50 PA. So that's the blower door test. We depressurize the house or pressurize the house and measure the air leakage rate. And they're very, very tight. These houses are really airtight, and that makes it totally different in terms of how they behave, again, on a windy day, or when there's outdoor air pollutants. So we do know that houses built to these standards who were near the Marshall Fire don't have anywhere near the problem with smoke damage from traditional houses that allowed much higher leakage rates. So it's kind of a low-hanging fruit, because it doesn't take a lot of extra money to build a really airtight house. It does take a little bit of time and a little bit of care on the part of the designer to design the wall system and the contractor to build it. But we're not talking about expensive materials, and we're not talking about inventing new ways of construction. These are tried and true methods of building homes that works really, really well. I will say that for the rebates require full compliance with the passive house standards. So this is something that you should keep in mind, that even if you wish for a passive house and that's your target, you might want to make sure that you're also just paying attention to how the house scores and how you can demonstrate code compliance, because we do have a number of folks who have said we want to achieve passive house to demonstrate code compliance, and then as they got into it, they weren't as confident that they were going to make these stringent targets, and so they demonstrated code compliance using just the HERS score and the Zero Energy Ready Home program, and that worked great for them. And then they could still pursue the high standard of passive house, but if they didn't quite hit it, they weren't left out in the cold. There's not a lot of redundancy in terms of the energy modeling. There's a little bit, but not much. All of the passive house raters that I've been in touch with about this really don't see any reason not to also give them a HERS score at the same time. It's not that much extra effort, and they find that those homes meet those requirements quite comfortably. All right, next slide.
So we're nearing the end here, and we can have more Q&A, and we also collected some questions at the start that we want to make sure we cover as well. But the last thing we want to go over are a couple of additional resources. The first being a new website, rebuildingbetter.org, that does not exist yet. If you go to it right now, you will see that the domain, there's nothing there, but we're working on it. I've been working on it all day. It was purpose-built for rebuilding after the Marshall Fire. It has resources for both homeowners and for builders. It has information and education, as well as details about the incentives, discounts, and financing that have been made available. It also has contact information for getting live support from Energy Smart staff for rebuilding a high performance home. And it's organized in chapters on building a healthy and comfortable home, building a resilient home, the rebates, discounts, and financing, finding your team, materials and equipment, and landscaping and outdoor considerations. Many of the questions we got prior to this event tonight through the registration on, for example, what questions to ask your builder and architect, things like that. Those things will all be found on that website, as well as detailed FAQs, frequently asked questions about Excel's incentives and other aspects. As Ron mentioned, there are a couple of trainings coming up from Excel on Energy Star version 3.2 and Zero Energy Ready Homes. These are specifically geared towards builders and raters. They're open to the public, but it's going to be highly technical. But great information to pass along to your builders and raters. They don't yet have a registration link, but when we have it, we will pass it along. In May, there's another webinar from the Passive House Network on more details specifically on what is a passive house and why you might want to consider it. And even if you're not building a passive house, the principles apply to whatever home you're building. The passive house standard is sort of the highest upper echelon, but the principles apply whether you're building a code minimum or a home that would be more high performance.
So there's a lot of additional resources for specific questions. Just to go through what's on this slide here. So the first couple of links are directly to the Boulder County Building Code webpage. So that first link brings you to a webpage that has all sorts of information about our code, the details of the code, as well as links to specific handouts that might go into specific details. That email address there, that is a monitored email address that our plan review team looks at every day. And so if you or your builder has specific code related questions, that's probably one of the fastest ways to get detailed answers. We also have a link here for folks who want to subscribe. So as we have new information or new details to discuss, anyone who subscribes to that subscription site will get email updates that are related to building code updates. And then finally, there's a link there to a free online source for the nationally published codes. So when you go to the Boulder County website, there's a PDF of the local amendments to the building code, but that is based upon a much larger document. Mostly what we're talking about is the IRC, the International Residential Code, and that's a very, very long book that is in the office of every architect and most builders who need to build to that code, and it covers everything in the code. Our local amendments just are published, and they talk about places where something in Boulder County is different than those nationally published codes. Also is my contact information, as well as the contact information for the Marshall Fire Recovery. So if you have a larger, broader question about rebuilding after the Marshall fire, that Marshall rebuilding at bouldercounty.org is the place to go, and that gets to the rebuilding team, and whatever your question might be, we can make sure we get you the answer, or at least point you to where those answers can be found. And then finally, we have our recovery page for Marshall Fire in Boulder County. Next slide, Zach.
And a couple more things here. Again, the rebuildingbetter.org website will launch this week. If you have questions about building a high performance home, reaching out to Energy Smart, the contact information there is a great strategy. If you have questions or want to find out more about Excel's incentives, their FAQ and additional resources is available on their page, as well as they have a I forget what they call it, but they have a phone line for questions related to Excel related questions related to Marshall Fire. My contact information is on this slide as well.
And I guess I just want to come back to probably the most frequently asked question just one more time, because the costs are a big deal. We're seeing unfortunately some of the highest construction costs we've ever seen currently right now, and that is an artifact of some costs were already going up prior to this fire, mostly because of a busy marketplace, but also we're seeing just unprecedented supply chain interruptions, and those are interfering with normal construction just across the board. So we do recognize that that's the baseline environment, and that makes all of this really hard. I would say that said, what we have to keep comparing, the energy code requirements to is, what's the overall cost of construction and how can you simplify things? And we have always known, this is not new information, but we've always known the simplest way to reduce the cost of a construction project is to make it smaller. And that remains true today, that by reducing the size of the house and reducing the complexity of a house, you do bring down costs, and that's always been true. But it bears repeating again, because we are in a situation where we are seeing escalating construction prices at an unfortunate time. Okay. At this point, I'd like to just reach out to staff and just ask, are there any additional questions that look like they're appropriate for the group that have not been addressed so far?
One that I'll cover, let me change my screen share here. Prior to this session, we got a question on what questions should you ask your build team as you're picking a build team, and I just wanted to preview this section of the Rebuilding Better website. Some of these questions on do they have experience working with total loss insurance claim rebuilds? That can really help your process go smoother if your builder has experience working with insurance companies in that way. Are they comfortable building to the style and quality and energy performance of the home that you're hoping to build? These are some of the questions that we would recommend considering asking, and these and others will be available on the Rebuilding Better website when it launches this week.
Thank you, Zach. Do we have other questions that should be addressed?
Hi, Ron, it's Michelle. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess one of the questions that we kind of have on here was just about, that was a pre-question, was about the WUI code. I didn't know if we had time to just go over that quickly.
Sure. So we have been in the process of updating our ignition resistant construction requirements for what we call wildfire zone 2. So that is the entirety of the affected area from the Marshall Fire was in fact in wildfire zone 2. And we are in the process of that. We've had a board of review meeting a couple days ago, last week, and we those requirements were approved to be moved to the Boulder County Commissioners for their evaluation. And basically what we have done is modified the exterior ignition resistant requirements for construction. Some of those features are pretty low cost additions. So for instance, we require that would require all Class A roofing in wildfire zone 2. Class A roofing does dominate the marketplace. We don't see much Class B proposed when you go to any of the big box retail stores for home products, Lowe's, Home Depot and such. Class A roofing materials dominate the market, so we were just putting that in the code. But there were some additional changes to, for instance, we would require non-combustible downspouts and gutter systems. So you couldn't have vinyl gutters. That could have a very modest amount of increase, but it's not a big number, and could go a long way towards preventing a similar kind of fire from spreading in the same way. Also things like non-combustible, ember resistant roofing vents. So if you would either need to buy products that are sold as ember resistant roofing vents, or there's also an allowance in the code to simply take a roofing vent and you cover it with a finer steel mesh that prevents windborne embers from being able to enter the attic assembly. There's also details in there about providing a 3-foot perimeter around the new home that is made of non-combustible materials. So for instance, if you had a wooden fence on your property, that wooden fence couldn't just connect to the house, but there would need to be something in between, a non-combustible fence for the section immediately surrounding the house. So a couple of interesting features about that we think will go a long way towards preventing a similar catastrophe from happening again. One of the things that is true is that that we have a huge portion of Boulder County is surrounded with grasslands. One of the very unfortunate lessons we learned is the kind of hazards that those grasslands can present, and especially can present in a climate that is changing. So historically, we've always had wintertime windy days, but what it was unusual about this last winter was that in September, October, November, December, we did not have any of our big fall snowstorms. Those snowstorms not only provide critical moisture to our grasslands to keep those fuels from becoming quite so combustible, but they also mat down those tall grasses and also make them less likely to spread quite as quickly. And so we are recognizing that our climate is shifting, that the hazards, the wildfire hazard is also shifting. And so we need to accommodate our construction practices to adjust for that. So that's what's going on with the ignition resistant requirements for these homes.
We had another question in the registration about realistic cost to build a passive house. The recording is not yet up, but last week, the Colorado Green Building Guild hosted a webinar about a passive home that was built in Louisville recently for, I believe, around $350 a square foot. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it was in that range. That recording will be available, I would expect, within a week's time on the CGBG, stands for Colorado Green Building Guild.org website. And we will also feature that on the Rebuilding Better website once it becomes available.
Any other questions that we haven't yet addressed?
We have a couple of questions on will this meeting be recorded and how do we get access to that? Yes, it'll be recorded. And Rick, do you want to share how access to that will be shared?
Yes, this is Rick Hackett staff. The meeting recording will be posted tomorrow, Wednesday, on the Marshall Fire Recovery webpage. There's a link to the chat, a link to that page in the chat that you can look at there. It'll also be posted on our YouTube channel for community planning and permitting, the video itself. And I can put a direct link there too. And that'll be up tomorrow, tomorrow afternoon, probably when we get it edited.
Okay. All right. Well, as people work on, work on developing your team for rebuilding and putting together plans and working through the process. We are well aware that many people are still very much in the early stages, still trying to get their bearings, to work through their insurance companies to figure out where things stand. We do recognize that there will be ongoing questions, and we really do encourage people to reach out. Let us know what's on your mind. Let us know what you need to help understanding. Both you as homeowners or any design professionals that you work with. We do recognize that there are likely to be many people who are going to be working on projects that haven't been working in Boulder County, or maybe are a little less familiar with some of the code requirements. And so we do encourage everyone to let us know what's on your mind, what you need help with. If there are additional workshops that we need to put together, we're happy to organize some additional educational and outreach opportunities. I know the Colorado Green Building Guild has laid out a pretty comprehensive sequence of presentations on many of these topics, but we're happy to engage in more of those as might be helpful to our community. So I guess with that, I'd like to just thank everybody for your time, and to thank our interpreters for helping manage that. With that, and thank you to all the CP&P staff that's on this call helping to put this together. So really do appreciate the team working on this together, and thank you all for your time.